think about the great NFL defenses, they all have the same traits. A stalwart leader who embodies the team's energy and culture, a swarming mentality that overwhelms their opponents, and a terrifying swagger that can ground opposing offenses. We've all seen these great defenses come and go. In today's NFL, they often seem extinct. But now, in 2025, the Chargers are trying to make their case as the next great NFL stonewall after a stellar 2024 campaign and a Week 1 statement in Sao Paulo. What's up, everyone? I'm Sam Peña, a Bolt fan in the Berg for Chargers Digest, where we talk about all things Lightning. Today, we're talking about the Los Angeles Chargers defense and some of the takeaways from Friday night's game against the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a follow-up to our offensive episode that we aired yesterday. And today, I want to focus, though, on some of the deep dive numbers, the analytics behind the game, to showcase why I believe the Chargers were able to pull out that game and hold the Chiefs and Mahomes to just 21 points. So, let's talk about it. I think the first takeaway I have from this game is efficiency. I spoke about this on the offensive end yesterday for the Chargers, but I also think they were efficient on the defensive side as well. And I'm talking about those third down plays. They're the most important plays in the game. We've all seen it in years past. The Chargers have Herbert lead a drive that could win the game, that puts them ahead against the Chiefs, and it looks like they're finally going to get over that hump. In fact, Herbert has led a potential game-winning drive 5 out of the 7 losses he has against Pat Mahomes, but like I said, he's lost those games. Why? Because defenses have continually given up those game-winning drives to Mahomes. The rule of the NFL these days, it seems, is whoever gets the football last wins. Well, on Friday, Mahomes had a huge opportunity against the Chargers after that 4th and 7 conversion, but the Chargers defense held strong and forced a field goal. When you take a look at the third down numbers, the Chargers were able to convert 54% of their third downs. The Chiefs, though, were only able to convert 36% of their third downs. And that also held up in the red zone as well. We saw this last year where the Chargers were the number 1 defense in all of football at preventing touchdowns in the red zone. They only allowed opposing offenses to score 45% of the time in the red zone versus the Chiefs, who only scored on 55% of their red zone drives, which was 22nd in the NFL. That carried over into the game on Friday night. In fact, the Chiefs' touchdowns, only one of them was in the red zone on Friday night. The other one came on a deep touchdown pass to Travis Kelce. So the Chargers, for the most part, were able to hold them in check and were very efficient against the Kansas City Chiefs, forcing 2 field goals that really were the difference in this game. In fact, if Herbert hadn't had that slide to win the game, Mahomes would have had an opportunity to be able to get the football back and drive down the field, but he would have had to score a touchdown and not a field goal because the Chargers were able to hang tight and hold on defense. My second takeaway, though, from the game is more of a negative, which is that the Chargers are not going to have a lot of pressure this season. At least that's what it felt like after that game. We all knew the Chiefs' offensive line was one of the weak parts for this team, but the Chargers really weren't able to create much of anything against the Chiefs. When you look at the pressure numbers, Mahomes really wasn't under duress for most of the game. In fact, any of the pressures that came throughout the game seemed to be schemed up by Jesse Minter, including one of the huge plays towards the end of the game that forced Mahomes to throw the football away in what would have been a potential tying touchdown scenario. So the Chargers have some work to do to be able to get after Mahomes. I thought Tuli Tuipulotu played well. Khalil Mack, though, as great of a run defender as he is at this point, he's starting to show his age when it comes to his pass rush abilities. I'm worried that the Chargers aren't going to be able to create a consistent push to be able to force opposing quarterbacks to make bad plays. I do think, though, that Jesse Minter is a defensive genius, though, and will be able to scheme up some pressures. And that leads to my next takeaway, which is Deion Henley is a force. We all knew Deion Henley took a major step forward last year for the Chargers, but in 2025, we wanted to see him finally ascend to the player that we knew he can be, which is that of one of the 5 best linebackers in all of football. And week 1 was a good indication of that. He obviously was spying on Mahomes and had that huge sack on him in the first half. But more than that, Deion Henley just showed consistently that he's able to make the right reads, fill and plug the holes. We already know he's a good coverage linebacker. But I think one of the things that we're really starting to see him improve on is his ability to consistently tackle as well, which is my next takeaway, which is that the Chargers are going to be one of the best tackling teams in the NFL this season. When you look at those all-time great defenses, you talk about defenses swarming to the football, and that's what it felt like on Friday night for the Chargers. Specifically, when you look at the yards after contact numbers, those were very impressive for the Bolts. Broad look at the analytics shows that the Chiefs had, more rushing yards in the game and a higher yards before contact metric. But in yards after contact, the Chargers were better. They averaged 2.2 yards after contact, whereas the Chiefs averaged just 1.6. That may not seem like much, but that's a huge difference in the game if that's consistently happening every play. The Chargers were rallying to the football, and they were taking down the ball carriers, preventing the Chiefs from having some of those big plays that they've had in years past. So that's something that I think is going to be a positive outlook for the Chargers in 2025. But we have to talk, though, on the negative side about the secondary concerns, specifically when it comes to communication. I think this is going to be something that is going to have to be a work in progress for the Chargers, because we saw on multiple big plays yesterday that they were really struggling to be able to contain the Chiefs, and it was due to miscommunication. Obviously, we're talking about that huge Travis Kelce touchdown. That was a great play by the Chiefs. The Chargers were continuing to try to rally up and take away those little RPO actions that the Chiefs showcase, and the Chiefs hit a big play to Travis Kelce, but a lot of that was because Molden and the linebacker weren't communicating properly with each other, and so the linebacker tried to pass off Kelce. Molden was late getting over there because he was watching the inside route, but Dante Jackson had that coverage all day. It really felt like it was unnecessary for Molden to be caught in no man's land there, and that's what led to the big touchdown. And kind of the offshoot or the next takeaway I have for the defense is a bit of a negative as well, and that's Cam Hart's play. Going into this season, I was pretty high on Cam Hart. He had a very impressive rookie season that was hampered a little bit by injuries, but against the Chiefs, he really struggled. He really, really struggled. When you look at the EPA yards for wide receivers, Tyquan Thornton, of all receivers, was one of the best in the NFL in Week 1, and that's because he was consistently beating Cam Hart over the top for a potential huge play. Fortunately for the Chargers, Mahomes just kept missing him. In fact, there were 3 times where Hart was beat deep by Thornton, and on all 3 of those plays, Mahomes overthrew him. Those are plays that, towards the end of the season, Mahomes is going to be hitting those. I think a big part of it is the fact that Cam Hart, he's a bigger corner. He's 6'2", he's 215 pounds. Generally speaking, those guys, they don't have the hip flexibility or the movement skills to be able to turn and run with receivers. And so they have to make up for it by either A, being incredibly physical at the line of scrimmage at press to be able to prevent receivers from creating separation, or they have to give a decent cushion, recognize their speed isn't enough, and then they flip their hips early so they can run with the receivers downfield. I felt like Cam Hart wasn't doing either of those things on Friday night against the Chiefs, and that was a big problem for the Chargers. Towards the end of the game, it felt like the Chargers were trying to give him a little bit more safety help, which prevented some of those bigger plays, but they can't do that every single game. On the flip side, one more positive takeaway for the Chargers secondary is Dante Jackson. He was one of the highest graded Chargers in the Friday night's game against the Chiefs. And a big part of that was his ability to consistently be able to prevent any sort of separation towards the sideline. We saw a few plays where Mahomes tried to be able to get some of those comeback routes along the sideline, and Jackson was all over them from the start of the game. He almost had 2 interceptions in the game as well that just barely went off of his hands. He's someone who has created a lot of interceptions in his career. Hopefully, he'll be able to continue that in 2025 for the Chargers. And finally, the last takeaway I have for the Bolts is Teair Tart. My goodness, what a force he was for the Chargers on Friday night. He almost was one of the negatives for the Bolts after he slapped Travis Kelce across the face and nearly got himself ejected. Fortunately, that didn't happen because he was a key part of why the Bolts were able to hold the Chiefs in check. He had 3 passes batted at the line of scrimmage, including one crucial one towards the end of the game when the Chiefs were in the red zone that forced them to settle for a field goal. Tart is someone who the coaches have repeatedly talked about this offseason. It seems like they have high hopes in them. Jesse Minter seems to have quite a bit of faith in him. The Chargers had him as a mid-season acquisition last year, and since he came on over to the Bolts, he's played pretty well for them. But he was someone who had big shoes to fill because Poona Ford departed in the offseason. Poona Ford was an incredibly important defender for the Chargers in 2024. Tart had huge shoes to fill, and so far, at least in week 1, it seems like he might be able to do that. In fact, he told reporters after the game that he felt as if the coaching staff had a lot of faith and trust in him, and that was leading to a higher level of play, at least so far from what we've seen. Now, the rest of that defensive line is going to continue to be shuffled. Obviously, Deshaun Hand and Atito Agbanyo are going to be getting playing time, maybe even Justin Ebiagbi, who was one of the Chargers' draft picks last year. But I think Tart is going to be one of the key mainstays along that defensive line in 2025. This is a defense that doesn't play for individual glory. They play as a collective whole to be able to annoy and shut down any offensive plays that are thrown against them. Will the Chargers be the best defense in football as they were last year? I don't know. But can they be a defense that gets the job done? Yes. The Chargers are going to be a problem in 2025, and I, for one, can't wait to see what Jesse Minter is cooking up in the weeks ahead. Thank you all so much once again for watching. I'm Sam Peña, a Bolt fan in the Berg here for Chargers Digest. I would really appreciate y'all's support if you could like and subscribe. We're trying to build the channel here from the ground up. Any sort of help you can give to us can be able to go get better equipment in here so that we can keep the content going. For now, Bolt Nation, remember, bolt up.